I found a little girl crying alone in the rain and took her into my home to keep her safe. I immediately called the police to report that I'd found a lost child. The next morning, the mayor and a team of detectives were at my door, and they told me that the little girl asleep on my sofa was the state's most famous missing person. Before we get into it, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for more stories every day. Okay, let's head out into that rainy night. My life, for the past 6 months, had felt like I was treading water in a cold, deep ocean. I had been laid off from my job as a graphic designer, and my savings were dwindling at an alarming rate. I lived in a small, modest apartment in a neighborhood that was quickly becoming too expensive for me. A fact my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, seemed to take a special, malicious pleasure in reminding me of. She was a woman whose curtains were always twitching, whose eyes were always judging. She would make comments in the hallway about the quality of my grocery deliveries or the fact that my car was 10 years old. In her eyes, I was a failure, a temporary blight on her otherwise perfect world. On this particular Tuesday, the world outside seemed to match the gray, hopeless landscape of my own life. A cold, relentless rain had been lashing the city all day, and I was walking home from the bus stop after another discouraging, fruitless day of job interviews. I was soaked to the bone, my thin coat no match for the driving wind, my heart a heavy, leaden stone in my chest. I felt invisible, a nobody, just another struggling person in a city that didn't seem to have a place for me. It was in this state of mind, as I was trudging down the final, rain-slicked block to my apartment, that I saw her. She was huddled deep in the shadows of a glass bus shelter, a tiny, solitary figure in the midst of the storm. A little girl, no older than 7, with big, terrified eyes and dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks. She was shivering, her thin dress soaked through, and she was crying, not with loud, attention-grabbing sobs, but with the silent, hopeless tears of a child who has given up. My first thought, I am ashamed to say, was to keep walking. I was tired, I was cold, I was drowning in my own problems. The last thing I needed was to get involved in someone else's. But then she looked up, and our eyes met, and in her eyes I saw a reflection of my own profound and deeply felt loneliness. I couldn't walk away. I took a deep breath and stepped into the shelter, the sound of the rain drumming on the plastic roof a deafening roar. "Hi there," I said softly, my voice gentle, the same one I used on frightened animals. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" She flinched, pulling her knees tighter to her chest, a small, wounded creature. I can't find my daddy," she whispered, her voice a tiny, fragile thing. "What's your name, sweetie?" I asked. "Daisy," she whispered. "Okay, Daisy. That's a beautiful name. My name is Felicity. Do you know your mommy or daddy's phone number, or where you live?" She just shook her head, fresh tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know," she cried. "I want to go home." I knew what I had to do. I couldn't leave her here. I couldn't call the police and hand her over, a terrified, traumatized child, to a pair of strangers in a uniform. Not yet. First, she needed to be warm. She needed to be safe. She needed to feel like a person again. "Okay, Daisy," I said, my voice full of a confidence I did not feel. "My apartment is just across the street. It's warm and it's dry, and I have a secret weapon. The best hot chocolate in the entire world. Why don't you come with me, and we can get you warmed up, and then we can figure out how to find your daddy together. I promise. You'll be safe with me." She hesitated for a long moment, her big, dark eyes searching my face, and then, with a small, trembling nod, she took my outstretched hand. The next hour was a whirlwind of quiet, focused care. I got her out of her wet clothes and wrapped her in my biggest, fluffiest bathrobe. I made her a giant mug of hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. I sat with her on my old, comfortable sofa, wrapped in a warm blanket, and we watched cartoons. I didn't press her for information. I just let her be. Slowly, the terror in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a deep, profound exhaustion. She fell asleep, her small head resting on my lap. I looked down at this sweet, innocent, and completely unknown child who had, through a random act of fate, landed in my life. And I knew I had to make the call. This was not a lost puppy. This was a human child. I gently moved her head to a cushion, went into my kitchen, and I dialed the non-emergency number for the city police. "Hello?" I said, my voice a low whisper. "My name is Felicity Stone. My address is 432 Oak Street, apartment 2B. I'm calling to report that I have found a lost child. Her name is Daisy. She's about 7 years old. She's here with me now. She's safe, but she's very scared and she doesn't know where she lives." The dispatcher on the other end was professional and calm. She took my information, thanked me for my responsible actions, and told me that it was a very busy, chaotic night due to the storm, but that she would dispatch an officer for a welfare check as soon as one became available. I hung up the phone. I looked at the sweet, innocent little girl asleep on my sofa, and I felt a profound sense of peace. I had done the right thing. I had taken a child out of the storm and brought her into the safety of my home. I had no idea that my simple, responsible phone call had just inserted me into the middle of the biggest and most desperate manhunt in the state's history, and that in trying to bring this little girl home, my entire world was about to be changed forever. I hung up the phone with the police dispatcher, my own heart a steady, reassuring rhythm in the quiet of my small apartment. The sense of purpose, of having taken a concrete and responsible step, was a welcome anchor in the emotional storm of my own life. I looked at the small, sleeping girl on my sofa, her face finally peaceful in the soft glow of my table lamp, and I felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done the right thing. My silent sacrifice that night was my own swirling anxiety. I had 100 of my own problems: the overdue rent, the dwindling savings, the constant, gnawing fear of my own uncertain future. It would have been so easy to be selfish, to see this lost little girl as just another burden, another complication I couldn't afford. But as I looked at her, so small and so vulnerable, my own problems seemed to shrink, to become insignificant in the face of her immediate, desperate need for safety. I sacrificed my own self-pity for the sake of her well-being. I spent the next hour making my small apartment a sanctuary for her. I found an old, worn copy of my favorite childhood book, Goodnight Moon, and placed it on the coffee table for when she woke up. I made up a proper bed for her on the sofa with my softest pillow and the warm, handmade quilt my own grandmother had given me. I sat in the armchair beside her, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her small chest, and I felt a fierce protective instinct I hadn't felt in a very long time. What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that while I was creating a small, quiet pocket of peace for this one lost child, the world outside my window was exploding into a state of absolute, frantic chaos. I didn't know that while I was reading her a gentle bedtime story, every television screen in the state was flashing with an Amber Alert, displaying a school photograph of the very same girl who was now sleeping peacefully just a few feet away from me. I didn't know that her face was on the front page of every news website, under headlines that screamed, "Billionaire's daughter, Daisy Lancaster, kidnapped." I didn't know that her father had offered a $1 million reward for her safe return, and that a massive, statewide manhunt involving hundreds of police officers and the FBI was underway. I didn't know that my small, insignificant apartment had, by a strange twist of fate, become the very epicenter of the biggest news story in the country. I just knew that a little girl was safe, and for now, that was enough. The morning arrived with the soft gray light of another rainy day. I woke to the smell of my own coffee and the quiet shuffling sound of small feet. Daisy was awake, standing in the middle of my living room, clutching the blanket around her, her large, dark eyes full of a quiet, sad confusion. "Good morning, sweetie," I said, my voice soft. "Did you sleep well?" She just gave a small, uncertain nod. "Are you hungry? I am a world champion pancake maker, you know." A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "With chocolate chips?" she whispered, her first real words to me. "With extra chocolate chips," I confirmed solemnly. The half hour that followed was a moment of pure, simple, and beautiful normalcy. We made pancakes together. I let her stir the batter, and she got flour all over her nose. We sat at my small kitchen table and ate, and she finally, slowly, began to talk. She told me about her puppy and her favorite color, and how she didn't like broccoli. She was just a little girl, a sweet, funny, and perfectly normal little girl. It was in the middle of our pancake breakfast that a sharp, aggressive knock sounded on my apartment door. It was not a polite knock. It was a hard, official, and demanding sound that made us both jump. My first thought was of my nosy, judgmental neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She must have heard the small sounds of a child in my apartment and had come to complain about the noise. With a sigh of annoyance, I went to the door and through the peephole, ready to deal with her petty complaints. But it was not Mrs. Gable. My blood ran cold. Standing in the hallway of my small, insignificant apartment building were two grim-faced police officers in full uniform, and standing between them, her face a mask of grave, serious concern, was the mayor of the city. My mind raced, a frantic, panicked chaos. What was happening? The non-emergency call. The dispatcher had said a welfare check. This was not a welfare check. This was something else. This was something serious. This was something terrible. I looked back at the little girl, at Daisy, who had run to hide behind my legs, her eyes wide with a renewed terror. And in that moment, a single, horrifying thought took root in my mind. The police, the mayor, the missing child. They weren't here to help. They were here for me. They think I took her. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I had no idea that the truth of the situation was 1,000 times more complicated and 1,000,000 times more rewarding than my wildest fears. I stood in my small, cluttered foyer, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold, sickening dread washing over me. The police, the mayor, this was not a welfare check. This was an accusation. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, in her smug, judgmental certainty, must have seen the little girl in my window this morning and called them, painting a picture of me as a lonely, unstable woman who had stolen a child. My single act of kindness, my one attempt to do something right in a life that felt like it was going so wrong, was about to be twisted into a crime. I took a deep, shuddering breath, tightened the sash on my own worn-out bathrobe, and I opened the door. The two police officers were large and intimidating, their faces grim and unreadable. The mayor, a woman I had only ever seen on television, looked exhausted, her expression a mask of grave, serious concern. "Are you Felicity Stone?" the lead officer asked, his voice a low, formal baritone that held no warmth. Before he could say another word, I began to speak, the words tumbling out of me in a frantic, desperate rush to defend myself. "Yes," I said, my voice a little too high, a little too shaky. "And the little girl, she's safe. I found her last night at the bus stop on the corner. She was all alone, in the middle of that terrible storm. She was soaked and freezing and terrified. I brought her here to get her warm. I gave her food. I called the non-emergency line immediately. I reported that I had found her. I gave my name, my address. I was just trying to keep her safe, I swear. I was just trying to do the right thing." The mayor and the officers just stared at me. their expressions shifting from grimness to a strange, almost baffled confusion. They exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. It was in that moment of tense, confusing silence that the little girl, Daisy, who had been hiding behind me, finally peeked out, her small face full of a child's curiosity, her fingers clutching the hem of my bathrobe. The mayor's professional demeanor did not just falter. It completely and totally shattered. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a loud, choked gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes, which had been full of a weary stress, now shined with a new, incredible light. "Oh my God, it's her! It's really her!" She looked at me, her eyes now shining with a new, incredible light. "It's Daisy Lancaster." I just stared back, completely and utterly bewildered. Lancaster. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. The lead detective then stepped forward, his own voice now much softer, much more gentle than before. "Ma'am, we are so sorry if we gave you that impression. We are here because of the report you filed last night."
He took a deep breath. "That little girl," he said, nodding toward Daisy, who was now clinging to my leg, "is not just a local lost child. She is Daisy Lancaster, the 9-year-old daughter of the billionaire industrialist Charles Lancaster. She was abducted from her bedroom in her home in the city 2 days ago. There has been a statewide Amber Alert. There's been a massive, nonstop manhunt for her ever since. She is," he said, the words finally landing with their full catastrophic weight, "the most famous missing person in the entire state." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked down at the sweet, quiet little girl who had gotten flour on her nose while making pancakes in my kitchen just an hour ago. The kidnapped Lancaster heiress. The little girl whose face was plastered on every news channel, on every billboard, in every newspaper. The story I had been completely oblivious to because I had canceled my cable and internet to save money. I looked past the police and the mayor to my neighbor's porch across the way. I saw Mrs. Gable, who had been watching with a smug, satisfied look on her face, her hands now pressed to her own mouth, her expression one of pure, comical, and utter shock. The troubled, down-on-her-luck woman next door had not been arrested. She had, in fact, just solved the biggest kidnapping case in the state's history. "Your call to the dispatcher last night," the detective continued, "was logged like any other missing child report. But this morning, when the statewide task force expanded its search parameters, your report was flagged and cross-referenced with the Lancaster case. The name Daisy, the location, it all matched." The mayor finally found her voice again. "Miss Stone," she said, her voice full of a deep, profound gratitude, "you have no idea what you have done. You are a hero. The entire state, her family, they are all in your debt." Just then, a police car, which had been waiting at the end of the street, began to drive slowly towards my apartment. It was a child services vehicle, with a kind-faced woman in the passenger seat. They were here to take Daisy, to bring her home. The little girl, who had been so brave, now began to cry, her small arms wrapping around my leg, not wanting to let go. My own heart broke all over again. I knelt down and hugged her tightly. "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered. "They're going to take you to your daddy now. You're going home." As the child services worker was gently leading Daisy to the waiting car, the detective turned to me one last time. "Mr. Lancaster, the girl's father, is on a helicopter, on his way here from the city as we speak," he said. "He is, very, very eager to meet the woman who found his daughter." I just nodded, my mind a complete blank. I watched as they gently placed Daisy in the car, my small, quiet apartment now the command center for a major federal investigation. I was no longer a suspect. I was no longer a failure. I was a hero. And in about 20 minutes, I was about to meet a grateful and very powerful billionaire who I was fairly certain was going to change my entire life forever. I stood in the doorway of my small, suddenly crowded apartment, a ghost at my own strange, wonderful, and terrifying party. The mayor was on her phone, speaking in low, urgent tones to what I assumed was the governor's office. The detectives were quietly conferring, their professional demeanor now tinged with a palpable sense of relief and excitement. And I,
Felicity Stone, the unemployed graphic designer who had been worried about making rent next month, was now the central and most bewildered character in the biggest news story of the year.
My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was still on her porch across the way, her mouth agape, her earlier smug satisfaction having completely curdled into a mask of pure, comical disbelief. The failure from apartment 2B, the woman she had so enjoyed looking down on, was now being hailed as a hero by the most powerful people in the city. The next 20 minutes were a blur of official activity. A team of child psychologists and paramedics arrived, not to treat Daisy, but to ensure she was okay, speaking to her with a gentle, practiced calm. Through it all, the little girl refused to leave my side, her small hand clutching mine, her quiet, trusting presence my only anchor in the swirling storm of chaos. And then we heard it, a sound that was completely alien to our quiet, modest neighborhood. The deep, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of helicopter blades, growing steadily louder until it was a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very windows of my apartment. It was descending, not on the street, but in the large open field of the park behind my building. "He's here," the lead detective said, his voice full of a new reverence. A few minutes later, a procession of black cars with tinted windows sped down our street and screeched to a halt in front of my building. Men in dark suits, all with earpieces, emerged, their movements sharp and professional. They formed a perimeter. And then, the back door of the lead car opened. The man who stepped out was not the flashy, arrogant billionaire I might have imagined. He was a man in his late 40s, tall and athletic, but his face was a ruin of sleepless nights and absolute terror. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes, the same dark, intelligent eyes as his daughter's, were filled with a raw, desperate, and singularly focused hope. This was not a titan of industry. This was just a father. He saw me in the doorway. He saw the small, familiar figure of the little girl clinging to my leg, and his composure, the composure of a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, completely and totally shattered. "Daisy," he breathed, the name a prayer, a sob. The little girl let go of my leg and ran. "Daddy!" she cried, her own voice a torrent of joyous relief. He met her halfway, scooping her up into his arms, burying his face in her hair, his entire body shaking with a grief and a love so profound it was a tangible thing. I stood and watched, my own eyes filling with tears, a silent, privileged witness to a reunion that an entire state had been praying for. After a long, emotional moment, he finally looked up, his daughter still clutched tightly in his arms. He looked at me, at my small, shabby apartment, at my worn-out bathrobe. He looked at me, the stranger who had saved his entire world. He walked over to me, his eyes full of a gratitude so immense it was almost overwhelming. "I don't know who you are and I don't know how you did it, but you have brought my daughter back to me. There are no words and there's no amount of money that could ever repay what you have just done for me." "I didn't do anything," I whispered, my own voice choked with tears. I saw a little girl who was cold and scared, and I brought her inside." He just shook his head, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face. He said, "You did everything." The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story, of course, was everywhere. The Angel of Oak Street, how a kind stranger saved the Lancaster heiress. I was no longer an anonymous, unemployed woman. I was a local hero. Mrs. Gable, I noted with a grim satisfaction, suddenly started leaving freshly baked cookies outside my door. But the real change came a week later. I was invited to the Lancaster family's city penthouse. It was a world of quiet, understated luxury that made the country club my in-laws frequented look like a cheap motel. Charles Lancaster, now looking rested and infinitely less haunted, was there to greet me. "Felicity," he began, "the $1 million reward is, of course, yours. It is already in your bank account. But that, he said, is a public gesture, a reward. It is not a thank you. He explained that in the days since Daisy's return, he had had his security team do a thorough background check on me. He knew about my job loss, he knew about my financial struggles, and he knew about my years of quiet, underpaid work in the nonprofit sector. You have a gift, Felicity. A gift for compassion, for seeing the people that the world overlooks. I have been wanting to start a new major philanthropic foundation for years, one dedicated to helping at-risk children. But I could never find the right person to run it, a person with both a good heart and a smart head. He smiled. It seems my daughter found that person for me. He offered me the position of executive director of the new Lancaster Children's Foundation. The salary was more than I had ever dreamed of making in my entire life. It was not a handout. It was a job, a purpose, a mission that was a perfect fit for the person I had always been. My vindication was not the money. It was not the fame. It was the quiet, profound, and beautiful irony of it all. I had been feeling like a failure, a woman whose kindness and compassion were liabilities in a hard, unforgiving world. I thought my life was over. But my single greatest act of compassion, the one I had performed on a rainy Tuesday night when I thought no one in the world was watching, had not been a detour from my life's path. It had been the path itself, leading me to a future more wonderful than any I could have ever imagined. I had been so worried about saving myself, I hadn't realized that the key to my own salvation was in the simple, powerful, and life-changing act of saving someone else. An absolutely incredible story about how the right thing to do can also be the thing that changes your life forever. What an amazing act of kindness from Felicity. Let us know what you would have done in that situation in the comments below. If you were moved by this beautiful story of a life transformed, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming stories of karma and justice. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.